Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are just about to get the 2039 to 2040 off-season underway. It was a very good regular season for our Oakland A's, won the AL West for a second consecutive season, had the best record in the American League. Unfortunately, we were routed out of the playoffs 3-0 in the ALDS against the Rangers, who we topped by 5 games in the division this year. So a disappointing finish to the season, but as we sit here heading into 2040, 16 years in charge of this very low-budget Oakland A's franchise, and we've now made the playoffs in 9 of the last 11 seasons, and we've won 3 World Series championships. So things have gone reasonably well here in Oakland, despite the disappointing finish to this 2039 season. Before we start moving on in this offseason, we're going to take a look at some of the top prospects in our organization, some of the more interesting prospects around baseball, and check in on some of our former players as well to see what they did this season. Last episode, we did our annual review of our roster as we start preparing for the off-season. Certainly the review of our farm system will certainly inform what we end up doing this off-season as well, as we've got several players who are not far off at all from being able to help us at the major league level. Before we look at our potential future, however, we'll look at some of the players who were an important part of our past. Byron Brain, who we traded away several years ago, another 30-plus home run season as a catcher, 31 homers and 90 ribbies this year for the Marlins. However, the batting average just a $193, struck out 241 times, and was a slightly below average offensive player. The left-hander, as you may remember, was a very key part of the acquisition of Kevin Patterson and Andy Brailovsky that we made a few years ago. Both Patterson and Brailovsky were members of at least one World Series championship team each for us, but certainly Brain is still with the Marlins while we have moved on at this point from both Patterson and Brailovsky. But given Brain's profile, the extreme number of strikeouts and the very low batting average was not necessarily someone that we thought really fit with the way we try to build a team. Sergio Figueroa has become a pretty good offensive player for the Houston Astros, certainly because he used that left-handed power bat at this point in our development as a franchise. Hit .275, 26 homers and 80 ribbies for the Astros this year, led the AL with 126 runs, 126 walks, also did have 108 runs for what it's worth. Put up a 142 WRC plus for the second consecutive season. Figueroa over 20 or more home runs each of his 4 seasons in the majors. He was a key point and a key item in a rental of Brian Ramos, who's long retired. Figueroa, certainly when we traded him away, was still a couple years away from making the majors, but given that it was just for a rental of Brian Ramos, certainly could say that the Astros have done well with that trade. First baseman Shoji Bame, the professor, you may remember him, a guy who came over from Japan. We thought seriously about trying to bring him on board. The Dodgers outbid us. He had some really good years to the start of his career in the Dodgers, and then, however, by the time he got to his mid-30s, the Dodgers moved on from him. He ended up with the Nationals, and he actually retired after this season with the Nationals, where he hit just a $178 in 146 at-bats. Did end up with over 200 home runs in 8 seasons in Major League Baseball. So had a nice career, but given the money that the professor was looking for, it was never really realistic for us to think we could outbid the Dodgers to bring him on board. Arturo Estrada, another player that we traded away years ago, split this year between AAA Buffalo and Toronto in the majors, hit 264 in 148 bats at the major league level, 88 WRC plus, close to 1 win above replacement. Did have 18 stolen bases in 20 attempts, but not a big-time offensive player, and he's also wrecked physically at this point. And last, and quite honestly, probably least among this group, is Kevin Stubblefield, a guy that we drafted years ago, traded to Boston 4.5 years ago at this point. Thought he was a guy that we would be building around, signed him to what we thought was a very interesting contract, but just never really produced the way that we thought he would at the major league level. And you can see even over the past few seasons, had a cup of coffee with the Red Sox in both 2037 and 2038. This past year spent the entire season down in Worcester, where he hit 308 in 156 at-bats, but never made it up to the big club this past season. Few pitchers to check in on as well. Andres Rojas, a knuckleballer who we thought about drafting many years ago, had an incredible run with the Marlins, signed as a free agent with the Yankees this past offseason and went 16-9 with a 3.59 ERA, a WAR of close to 6. Estrada, 2031 Cy Young Award winner and now an 8-time All-Star, with a 55.8 career WAR. He'll be 33 years old soon, but he's signed for another 5 years, potentially with the Yankees if that vesting option kicks in. Certainly could be a Hall of Fame caliber pitcher when his career is finally over. Joe Lewin, a pitcher who we drafted, came up in our system and we traded away. And he's become a good, solid major league pitcher, 12-6 with a 3.69 ERA for the Phillies this year. His 3.8 WAR is the lowest of his past 3 seasons, but the soon-to-be 27-year-old still off to a really nice start in his career with a 21.6 WAR over parts of 5 seasons in the major leagues. And again, he'll be 27 years old next season. So making good money at this point as a left-hander. I believe Lewin was also the cornerstone of a trade for Brian Ramos. Yes, so that's another. We rented Brian Ramos twice. I can't remember whether it was back-to-back seasons or whether it was 2 seasons apart. I think it might have been a couple seasons apart, but definitely got rid of some good players to rent Ramos. And unfortunately, never actually won a championship when we had Ramos on board. Did okay for us in 2032, but he got hurt as a rental, which didn't help us. 2033 did not hit well, and we traded him away. And then I think we may have moved on from him after 2032, and then we traded for him again in 2033. So we did trade for him in back-to-back seasons. Didn't do much then. Did have 30 homers and 98 ribbies for us with a 112 WRC plus in 2034. But again, parts of 3 seasons with Oakland, never won a world championship with him, and he's retired now. While unfortunately for us, Lewin looks like he could have another decade of being a pretty good offensive player ahead of him. Tim Killeen is a player that we traded away just about 3 years ago to Seattle. He's become a pretty respectable reliever, 6-7 record this year, 13 saves, 3.63 ERA, and a 1.3 WAR. Certainly not an ace, but a good, solid right-handed reliever. And last but not least, Jonathan Neiswager. You may remember him, a guy we considered drafting out of Purdue several years ago. He has missed 2 years in a row now with a torn rotator cuff. Hurt himself right at the spring training in 2038. Missed all of last year, missed all of this past season, and he's still not going to recover until probably early February next season. Who knows exactly what he's going to look like on the other side of this injury, but as a player who's going to be turning 28 soon and has not pitched in 2 seasons, certainly question whether he's ever going to make any impact as a major leaguer. And before we take a look at our farm system, we'll take a look at some of the top prospects in baseball. Some of these players were highly recommended by the worldwide scouting department, either during the draft or previous international amateur free agent periods. So always interesting to check in and see how some of these guys are developing. Starting pitcher Edison Faulo spent the entire year with the Pirates this year, a 10-13 record with an ERA of over 5. That said, he was still more than a win and a half above replacement, and his SIERA of 3.70, significantly better than what he did on the actual mound in terms of his actual ERA. The 1.47 whip, certainly not great, but when you look at his profile, certainly still think he could be a very interesting major league pitcher. Kurt Hall, 19-year-old potential two-way player who went 61st overall in the draft a year ago. 3-7 with a 3.22 ERA in his second season in rookie ball for the Texas organization this year. I believe he went the pick before we were seriously thinking about taking him to the Rangers. Taking a look at what he's done as a hitter, and he hit .212 this past year, did have 9 homers and 22 ribbies, but still was a well below average offensive player. That said, still looks like he could be a useful major league bat and potentially more than a borderline useful major league arm if he fully develops. He's also durable, and he's considered the number 74 prospect in baseball at this point. Reliever Josh Kiesler, 21-year-old. His lack of control really scared us off when we were looking at him. Split the year between rookie ball and A ball. 5-6 record with a 4.93 ERA in A ball for the Giants organization, but did walk 40 while giving up 8 home runs in 69 and a third innings. Still think that control is going to be a significant career limiting factor for Kiesler. And last but not least, Kazuki Asari in the Detroit Tigers organization. And he has made it to the Florida Complex League. Apparently they've moved him there, but he's never actually pitched. I wonder if maybe they just moved him there. But the 19-year-old is considered the number 22 prospect in baseball. Yeah, and it looks like they promoted him from the International Complex after the season was already done this year. Asari, if he reaches his full potential, certainly looks like he could be a very interesting major league pitcher. Some of his personality traits were a bit of a concern for us when we were looking at him almost 2 years ago. Looking at some of the more interesting hitting prospects in baseball, Alvaro Cepeda, 23-year-old, made his major league debut this year with Cleveland, hit just a .198, did have 24 doubles to go with 11 homers and 398 at-bats. But the 57 WRC plus, certainly not that great. Looks like he could still be a useful major league bat. Excellent defensive outfielder, and he has a little bit of speed, although his ability on the base paths, particularly trying to steal base, is not particularly impressive. That really negative personality with low leadership, adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence, the 4 traits that we care about the most, definitely turned us off of pursuing Carney Cepeda when he was available years ago. Sawyer Wenda, also a 23-year-old, Split the year between high A ball and triple A. Don't really understand why they sent him to high A ball after he had played a little bit in triple A the year before. Put up a 121 WRC plus in high A, and then a 135 WRC plus with a couple of dingers in 24 at-bats at the AAA level. Wenda, who was picked 34th overall 5 years ago, looks like he could be a decent fourth or fifth outfielder, but certainly not looking like anything special at this point. We've already talked about Kurt Hall. Cameron Rhodes, a little bit younger. He was picked 24th overall in 2036. Split this year between rookie ball and high A ball after he had 128 bats in the majors with Colorado last season. Obviously, he didn't do great, hitting just 148, but still a very strange career path for him as he goes from the majors all the way down to rookie ball, where he did hit 433, and then he hit just 228 in 189 bats in high A. He'll be 22 years old before next season starts. Still has a good personality, pretty solid outfield range, decent speed, and looks like his bat could still be interesting if the Rockies don't just destroy his development with the odd way that they are promoting and demoting him over the years. Left fielder Greg Grace, a 24-year-old, was picked 28th overall in 2037, college prospect out of FSU. Split this year between rookie ball and A ball. Was an above-average offensive player at both levels, given that he's now 24 years old. I probably would have tried to be a little more aggressive with his development. Still has a lot of work to do in terms of his home run power and his eye, given that he's already 24 years old. Don't really know that Mr. Magnificent is ever going to meet the full potential that we think he has. And last but not least, Alexis Campos, IAFA signing from 2038. Still in the international complex for Tampa Bay. He'll be turning 19 years old next month. Still looks like he could be an incredible contact hitter with outstanding gap power, great speed, and a pretty solid defensive outfielder. And before we take a look at our farm system, talk about a couple things that we've given some thought to since the last episode. Made arbitration offers to starting pitcher Doug Weiss, our closer Chuck Huntley, catcher Jorge Mendoza, and utility outfielder Sergio Palomares. Still kind of trying to figure out whether out of Garland, Ross, Dolan, or Mesidor, whether we want to make any offers to any of them in arbitration. Doesn't look like any of them have particular trade value, unfortunately. Which probably kinds of tells us that they're likely replacement-ish level players at this point, and unworthy, most likely, of the $1.2 to $4 million that they're expected to be making in arbitration this upcoming year. Still intrigued by Alan Hunsaker. Had a pretty solid year for us as a reliever this year after we signed him as a free agent. Really good influence in the clubhouse and a good, solid, right-handed reliever. As we talked about at the end of the last episode, feel like we might have just about all of our pitching staff figured out at this point, with maybe only one spot left, and with just the lefty Blumenshine in our rotation, the lefty Huntley as our closer, and the lefty Carmichael working out of the bullpen. Adding a fourth lefty into the mix might be the more prudent decision. But that being said, Suds Hunsaker is pretty good reliever, and he's not looking for a ton of money at just $1.8 million a year for the next 3 years. Probably can get him for a little bit less than that, and maybe have a team option or two in there. Doesn't want the closer role right now, which can always be a little difficult in terms of these negotiations, since we generally don't like to lie to players about what we're going to do with them. But still considering exactly what we should do with not just Hunsaker, but Mesidor, Dolan, Ross, and Garland as well. Not inconceivable that we move on from all of those players. Still looking at some trade options for our first baseman, Mr. Bowers, as well. Doesn't have a ton of value, but it's also not no value. So hopefully we can figure out something over the next few days to extract a little bit of value from some of these guys that we're likely to move on as the offseason gets moving forward. And last thing we're going to check in on before we check in on our farm system is our initial plan for the development lab. Basically, a lot of the better young players on our 40-man roster, as well as some of the top prospects in our organization, are getting the development lab spots at this point. Dozer Camunez, who we just signed to that extension, going to work on improving his pitch arsenal. I think that is a new or relatively new program because there's still secondary pitch improvement and there's still add pitch to the arsenal. But what improved pitch arsenal does, when I looked it up, was work on one of their lower quality off-speed pitches. So hopefully that will help Camunez. Jorge Sevilla working on quality of contact. Jorge Castillo, plate discipline. Federico Areola, secondary pitch improvement. Darnell Selvey and Juan Pimentel, a couple of rookies from this past season, both working on their contact. Two-strike approach with Luis Godina, who could be fighting for a spot on the roster next year. Chuck Huntley and Trey Saldana also working on improving some of their weaker pitches. Blumenshine and Baumler working on secondary pitch improvement. Psycho Alcindor going to try to hopefully improve his home run power after a disappointing year for him. Pinky Orozco, secondary pitch improvement. We're going to put the franchise into strength and conditioning. He's in his 30s, not expecting a ton of success here, but he's important enough for us that we'd love to make him a little bit more strong and durable. The young catcher / first baseman, Jonah Richards, working on his two-strike approach. David Palomares, one of the top prospects in our organization, working on plate discipline. Coy Simmons, who we drafted number 1 a couple of years ago, working on his contact. Jesus Ramos and Wilson Rangel working on pitch movement. And Mike Homer, potential two-way player, going to work on plate discipline. Didn't get into a lot of depth on some of these prospects because we'll be talking about them a bit more deeply right now. And as we start thinking about player development and doing our farm system review, right now we do rank second in all of Major League Baseball as far as where our minor league system ranks. And we have 8 top 100 prospects, including 4 who are in the top 31. And we'll be talking about a lot of these guys who are getting some attention at the development lab this offseason. So the top prospect in our organization is Jonah Richards. Mentioned he's a catcher / first baseman. Left-handed bat, which we do need at the major league level, and he's certainly not far off major league quality. He could be a revelation for us if we're unable to find a lefty bat this upcoming off season. Certainly think at this point Richards is probably a pretty productive major league player. Split the year this year between high A ball, double A, and triple A, combined for 30 home runs and 99, or was it 100, if I could do some quick math, 100, if I could do some quick math, runs batted in this past season across those 3 levels, well above average at each level, with a WAR of over 7 on the season. We've been playing him at first base more recently just to make him more versatile, particularly because we do really like our catchers right now with Mendoza and Ogata. But given that we're likely to move on from DH Ramos and first baseman Bowers, Richards could be in the mix as a first base slash DH type for us next season. Ratings suggest he should be a little bit more of a power hitter against right-handed pitching than he is against left-handed pitching, particularly if he has a good trip through the development lab. He could be breaking camp with us unless we decide to perhaps manipulate his service time a bit, given that Mendoza is likely to price himself out of Oakland after 2 more seasons, even if Richards plays primarily at first base, DH for us the next few years. Certainly see him as being a catcher of the future for us, given that his defensive ratings at catcher are more than acceptable. Federico Arriola and Ernesto Comunez are 2 guys we talked about last episode. Both made their major league debuts this past season. And Comunez we just signed to a large extension, hoping that he develops into a good, solid major leaguer for us. Jesus Ramos, 8th round pick from 2036. We've gotten really lucky with. He's developed into the number 31 prospect in baseball. He was a combined 11-5 between high A and double A this year, with a WAR of almost 5 between the 2 levels and over 100 strikeouts at each level. Certainly has a profile that indicates he could be a pretty good major league pitcher for us in the not too distant future. Mike Homer, we mentioned potential 2-way player, the number 78 prospect in baseball. Went a combined 11-9 as a pitcher between A and high A this year, with ERAs below 4 at both stops and combining for a 4.6 WAR. And as a batter, combined for 16 home runs and 53 ribbies at the 2 levels, batting in the low 200s, and was a below average offensive player at both levels. Certainly looking at this point that he might have a more significant future as a pitcher than as a position player, but not quite willing to give up on working on him as a 2-way guy at this point. He was our 2nd round pick back in 2036, and as we mentioned, is in the development lab this offseason. Jacoby Manelli was our prime IAFA signing in 2038. He just completed his first full year his second full year at the complex for us, and we'll almost certainly be promoting him at 18 years old to our DSL team next year. Wilson Rangel just made it up to AAA towards the end of this year. Another guy who started in high A ball, progressed through AA and to AAA. AAA, he was certainly less successful than he was at the other levels, but still was half a win above replacement, 10 games working out of relief. And when we look at his profile, certainly think he can be a very good left-handed reliever at the major league level. Not a ton of stamina, but he's already throwing in the mid to high 90s, and we still think there's some untapped potential for Mr. Rangel as well. And our final top 100 prospect, the left fielder Luis Godina, IAFA signing from 2033. Had a really nice year at AAA, 295, 35 homers, 115 ribbies. Honestly, he's also in the mix along with the young catcher to perhaps be a first base slash DH type for us this upcoming season. Pretty versatile defensive player, spark plug, so a nice personality in the clubhouse. Not the greatest defensive player, but I think his bat certainly indicates that he could be a pretty productive major league hitter. Right now, we're kind of heavy on right-handed hitters, so it's not inconceivable that he doesn't make the team out of spring training. But between Richards and Godina, feel like we've got some bats who are not far off from helping us, given that Arriola and Comunez also already helping us on the mound at the major league level. And part of the reason our farm system is so strong and ranks second overall is that in addition to the 8 top 100 prospects, we've got another 8 prospects ranked between 101 and 200. Closer Joe Heilman, 5th round pick a couple of years ago, split the year between A and high A, combined for 35 saves with ERAs under 3 at both levels. Left fielder Devin Carrick, 6th round pick from 2038, hit just a .173 in 255 at bats in rookie ball this year. Potentially outstanding power hitter. Did have 7 home runs for us, but making contact, avoiding strikeouts, and drawing walks are the things he's going to need to continue working on. Starting pitching prospect Chad Evans unfortunately suffered a torn rotator cuff in August. He was 0-2 with a 3.47 ERA in high A ball this year. The 23-year-old still looks like he could be a pretty interesting relief pitcher for us. He's got a really versatile arsenal for a reliever, just doesn't really have the stamina to start, although we have generally been starting him in the minors just to get him as much and as consistent work as possible. Hopefully he'll come back from that rotator cuff early next year and maybe end the year in Double-A, given that he'll be 24 by this time next offseason. Jorge Castillo, 22-year-old. He's one of the guys who's in the development lab. Pretty versatile defensive player, still working on his bat. Hit just 201 in high A ball for us this year. Was an above replacement level player, largely due to his good defense. If the bat comes along, he could be a pretty interesting infielder for us, but still certainly some work to do in terms of developing Mr. Castillo's bat. David Palomares, IAFA signing from 2037, made his professional debut in the DSL this year, where he hit .316, 17 homers, and 74 ribbies in just 291 at-bats. Think that Palomares, who is durable and a solid defender, could be a pretty interesting major leaguer for us if he reaches his full potential as a left-handed hitting middle infielder. Danny Hubel, a 14th round pick in 2037, split this year between rookie ball, A ball, and high A ball. Pretty effective at all 3 of those levels. The stuff we think could be borderline exceptional, and his movement and control should both be acceptable. Has a world-class slider, still working on his sinker, and think that the righty could be a pretty interesting bullpen arm for us in the not too distant future. Final 2 top 200 prospects for us. First baseman Juan Ramirez, IAFA signing from 2036, combined for 27 home runs and 82 ribbies between rookie ball and A ball this year. Very effective at both levels. He'll be 21 next year. Would certainly think he'll be starting the year in high A ball and probably make it up to Double-A before not too long. Looks like what we need, a left-handed bat that could hit some home runs for us down the line. Don't think he's going to be a dynamic defensive player, but Big Thunder is a good nickname for a left-handed power-hitting first baseman. And our final top 200 prospect, right fielder Jorge Sevilla. He's going to be 23 years old next week. Split the year between high A and Double-A, where he combined for 19 home runs, 65 runs batted in, and also had 38 doubles between the 2 levels. Very fleet of foot, was 24 out of 27 stealing bases at those 2 levels. Don't expect him to really hit for much home run power at the major league level, but still think that he could be slamming a bunch of extra base hits all over the field, stealing a lot of bases, and he's also a pretty versatile defensive player. You can see we've been training him in right field more recently, but he is also a pretty accomplished infielder as well. So if his bat continues to develop, Inch Sevilla could certainly be a pretty interesting infielder slash potential utility guy for us, maybe by late 2041. And just one other guy that I want to check in on, and he's a guy who's also in the development lab for us, Coy Simmons. We picked him in the first round a year ago in 2038 out of the University of Southern Mississippi. We're hoping that his left-handed bat might be one that was helping us at the major league level by about the start of next season. Unfortunately, his development hasn't really progressed the way that we hoped. Still think he can be a good defensive outfielder with respectable speed, and still think the bat could overall be pretty respectable. Unfortunately, didn't really see it too much this year. He hit 217 in 69 at-bats in A-ball after he hit 333 in 42 at-bats in rookie ball. Given that he's going to be 23 years old soon, even though he wasn't raking in A-ball, we promoted him to high A just to see what he could do there, and he was actually a little bit better. Got the batting average up to 231, did hit 3 homers, and had a 106 WRC+. Still has not performed the way we would have hoped in the minors for a guy that was a experienced college player when we drafted him. Would think that next year he'll be starting the year in high A ball, but the hope would certainly be that he progresses to double A and possibly even gets a quick cup of coffee towards the end of the year in triple A next season, and that a year from now he is in a position where he could be fighting for a roster spot for us in spring training 2041. Clearly needs to progress with his hitting ratings to have that be a realistic goal. Hopefully the time in the development lab will help jumpstart his development a bit for us. And with that, we'll call it an episode. Looking forward to seeing how some of these top prospects in our organization progress over the near to medium term. A lot of potential help on the way for a team that, as we've talked about, is also already a pretty good major league team. So looking forward to seeing how some of these prospects develop over the next few years. And also looking forward to getting this offseason underway in our next episode when we'll start making some decisions, probably trying to make some trades and clean in a bit of salary from some guys who probably don't deserve to be on our 40-man roster anymore, out of the way before we do get to free agency. Not anticipating that we're going to be big players in free agency this year. I did mention earlier in the episode our friend Alan Hunsaker, and when we look at the potential upcoming free agents, Hunsaker as a right-handed reliever stands out as probably the best profile of any pitcher that's going to be on the market. So that's part of the reason why we're thinking about bringing him back. The other thing you can see is that when you look at the only lefty on this first page of free agent pitchers, it's R.J. Cope, a guy who came up through our organization and that was with us for a long time that we moved on from last offseason. So just don't know that there's necessarily going to be any great left-handed pitchers that we can acquire in free agency. Obviously, we'll look in the trade market and see if maybe there's some avenues there, but Hunsaker looks like he may be the best reliever on the market. When we think about potential batters who are on the market, Walker Jenkins, Joe Edwards, and our first baseman, Juan Ramos, are the 3 highest rated players overall, all looking for pretty significant money that we are unlikely to be able to pay. And given that we generally like our major league roster and we feel that we do have some young infielders, outfielders, and even a catcher on the way, probably aren't going to be incredibly active at the top end of the free agent market for batters either in this upcoming offseason. And we'll finally start making some of those decisions in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.